Hello everyone, and welcome back to Nier Reincarnation. I'm G, and as we approach Spookmas, we will be wrapping up with the stories of two more characters. And I was thinking, now that we've synced up our hidden stories and dark stories, we might as well start doing the same pairs of characters. So I was thinking, what better pair to start with than Rion and Demos? So we'll start there. Silver dashed through the snow-powdered wood, chasing down prey so she might feed her hungry children. How old was I when I first read this book? I'm looking at a picture book about a wolf who takes in abandoned human children, giving a kind of home to the otherwise helpless creatures. I loved it as a child and found myself reading it over and over again. Why am I reading this book now? The wolf's skills grew sharper with age. Her eyes were ice, her claws razors. The rocky, snowy terrain posed no hazard for her, and within moments she had a single rabbit wedged between her teeth. Where does this book take place? Though the wolf was powerful, she was also kind. In the beginning, it troubled her how the children wailed without pause, and refused the meat she provided, but her spirit never broke. She began to skin the rabbits, cutting their flesh into tiny pieces before chewing it, and presenting the results to her changeling pups. After some time, human and animal slowly came to understand one another. That's what this picture book was about. I keep reading the book, but still don't understand what's going on. Then a voice from behind me, sudden. I begin to turn around, hoping to find the source when it dawns on me. Oh, right. I'm dreaming. My mother had departed the world when I was young, but at this moment, she's talking to me, looking at me with her soft, kind eyes. That's right. We read it together. Why did it take me so long to realize this was a dream? At the end of the book, humans kill the wolf in an attempt to protect the children. The same creature who abandoned their own offspring in the woods hunt down and kill the beasts that attempt to care for them. They hold the children at bay as they reach for her, and sing praises for justice as they slaughter the passive animal. This part always bothered me when I was young. I'd been unable to accept it, and remember asking my mother why the wolf didn't fight back when she had been in the right. I suppose that's just how mothers are, she replied after a moment of thought. I didn't understand back then. In fact, her response made me angry. But when my mother saw my reaction, she only smiled. I have been dreaming. I have been dreaming of memories long past. I am dreaming. I'm dreaming of the day my mother and my younger self were reading a book together, and my heart quivers as I see her for the first time in many, many years. No, that's not true. I kept her picture with me, the old news clipping that reported the Queen's death. When I was exiled, I had no time to gather photographs or keepsakes. There was time only to run. But I happened across the clipping while making my escape and snatched it up, and it has never left my side since. The woman in the photograph, however, is not the mother I knew so well. I do not see her gentle smile or her kind eyes. I see only the regality of a queen. Yet even knowing this, and knowing I am in a dream, I desire to speak with her above all else. But despite my fervent wish, my mother's face shifts like smoke in the dusk, and the closer I try to study her, the hazier her visage becomes. The next thing I know, I am standing in a different place, a hallway filled with the acrid tang of metal and cordite. There is something strange about the way I am viewing the world, and after a moment I realize my eye level is different than it had been. I'm taller now, viewing a memory of a different time. I look around and take in my surroundings. Before me stands a great window filled with massive panes of glass. Beyond are row upon row of guns belonging to the clockwork soldiers. They resemble human arms, and the way they are spaced equally apart disturbs me in a way I cannot easily explain. Beside me, another figure observes the laboratory. It is none other than my father, the king of our country. Ah, I see now. This is the day we visited the clockwork laboratory. One after another, the metal arms let fly a bullet. Each time the researchers write something down, fiddle with this or that, then reload and repeat the experiment. It is what my father calls fire control systems research, and I find it equal parts fascinating and horrifying. I spent more time with father after mother passed. I wonder what he had thought about that. My father was never much of a talker, but I don't recall him uttering a single word about my mother's death. The question of why this is sits quietly in my mind as we stand in the laboratory, but eventually I find myself inquiring about another matter. Why did we start conducting research into clockwork soldiers, Father? I don't really care about this matter. I just want to talk about something. Anything. I want to hear my father speak, because if he does, maybe it will lessen the gnawing fear of him that sits eternally in my heart. But his answer only stokes the flame of my disconcert. When superiors do not often give their answers, he says, I am a superior to all, including you. Yet one day this crown will lie upon your brow. Perhaps I will hear your thoughts on this matter at some point. Without waiting for a reply, my father turns on a heel and departs. But can I follow him? Do I even have the right? I dreamt of my past, memories of my mother, recollections of my father. Rarely did I dream after I left on my journey. Days of my childhood, images that paid me a visit for the first time in many years, were enough to fill me with nostalgia. The sensation was so powerful, time back then was so different from now, that it almost caused me to raise whines of misery. I wonder if what my mother said to me back then was true. I wondered what my father was thinking about when he spoke to me that day. As the questions from my dream arose, the sight before me warped once again. Heaven and earth flipped, light and shadow melded. Could these be memories of another time? The next thing I know, I'm standing in a rundown shack. Before me I see someone's back, one I am familiar with. I know right away what this is. I am in the process of repairing his clockwork body. I am sorry, my prince. There's a slight crackle to the voice I hear from over his shoulder. Dust must have gotten into his soundbox. But it's my fault that he was injured. My symptoms had gotten worse, and he had taken a blow meant for me instead. I couldn't fault him for that. I tell him that I should be the one apologizing, but he shoots me down. He is so kind to me, and that's why I'd been wondering this whole time if I'm just a burden to him. He supports me, and so is doing all he can to help stop the war. He is powerful yet gentle. I always wonder if there had been a different, more effective path that he could take to make my vision a reality. All I can do for him is repair his clockwork mechanisms, and if I were ever to teach someone else how to do it, then he would have no more use for me. The unease bubbles within me, and I give it voice. Should you really be accompanying me on my journey for the sake of my dreams? He falls silent, shocked. Terrified of the quiet, I immediately apologize, but the silence still hangs heavy over us. He says nothing. Nervous, I lean over and peer at him, to find that his eyes had gone dark and still. His operations ceased. My unusual question had caused an error in his operations that day. I reprimanded myself. I shouldn't bring these sorts of things up during repairs, and frantically returned to my work. And so, I never heard what his answer had been to my question. Dreams come to me, one after the next. I dream of life when I was young, of things that have recently happened, all of them moments important to me. And yet, why do I dream of such things now? Pain steals my consciousness, wiping away my thoughts. The sights before me slowly fade away. Now I understand. I'm waking up. I slowly lift my eyelids, but I can no longer sit up. In fact, I can scarcely move. The pain is a weight that shackles me to this place. I'd forgotten all about these things in my dreams. The ruined church, the illness that prevents me from moving. If only it was a dream. Though my eyes can barely focus, I see a figure move. The brim of his hat is wide and round, and he peers at me with worry. It is clear he has been watching over me even as I dreamed. I want to speak to him, but my strained throat can produce nothing but a harsh rasp. It seems our days of long fulfilling chats are now over. As I tense, he lifts me into his arms and sets me down atop an old weathered pew. My body relaxes as I sink into it. It's much easier to breathe here than when I'm leaning against the wall. I'm so relaxed I have trouble keeping myself awake. Yet despite my newfound ease, I am still unable to produce any kind of sound. Suddenly a thought enters my mind as true thing as I have ever experienced. If I close my eyes now, they will never open again. And so I muster all of my strength to force out a sound. I have to speak to him. I must. He has traveled with me across land and time. He is my best friend. And this is the end. Thank you. I'm sorry. At last, I manage 4 meager words. He initially tries to stop me as I desperately reach for my voice, but then falls into silent thought. Finally, after a long pause, he says, Alas, my ears can no longer hear his words, but strangely, I know his message regardless. Thank you, I say to myself. Thank you, I say, repeating the words over and over in my mind like a mantra, until sleep finally steals up and claims me. In the end, my dreams never came true. I was not powerful enough to end our endless wars, and yet there were people who stood by my ideals. Not many, of course, but some of them eventually agreed to form a third party that could act as mediators for various warring nations. They were small in scope, and it would be a long while before they had the pull to bring negotiations to other countries. I had lit the spark, and hopefully that spark would one day burn brighter than any fire of war and bring peace to the world. I want to believe this, for the sake of all those days I spent traveling with him. I want to believe it more than anything. Oh, you want to know more about him? He was born the eldest son and prince of a royal family. When he was young, his father started a war, but he was a kind boy who found this hard to accept. I heard he wanted to preserve peace for the people, so he turned his back on his country. Isn't it nice he got to choose a life for himself? Sadly, he took after his sickly mother. His physical condition, coupled with his kind pacifistic disposition, made him unpopular with ministers, soldiers, and his own father. Even the citizens occasionally besmirched him, asking him to stop blindly believing in the good in people's hearts. But even with all that, Mama thinks his thoughts and words saved a great many people. If he ever became king... No, it's because he never became king that he was who he was. My son was born today, our first child. Under normal circumstances, the emergence of the nation's new prince would have been welcome news. But right after the birth, both mother and boy were taken to the medical facility. Knowing they are in danger of losing their lives reminds me how fortunate they are to even draw breath, for the burden birth places on the body has claimed countless lives. Yet she understood this, which is why she gave me the throne that day. And yet, I cannot help but think on how she paid a great price for our child. How was he going to live? What would he bring to this country? I looked at his face before they were taken away. The way she smiled at me, in both pain and joy, would not permit me to dismiss such thoughts. Sounds of a campfire. So what'd you think of that prince? You mean the philanthropist, kid? Yeah, him. Whenever he opens his mouth, all these sweet little ideas come pouring out. Ideas almost as sweet as his face. World without war? Huh. Easy for him to say. Sounds of silverware being thrown. Kid's heart in the right place, but you don't understand reality. Got no interest in risking my ass for a general like that. How the hell are we supposed to feed ourselves in a world with no war, anyway? Right? Who's gonna hire a couple old farts like us who only know how to fight? Laughter. End recording. When I coughed at the ceremony this morning, my younger brother gently rubbed my back. Father didn't even try to hide his annoyance. That brother, the second prince, is the only one who bothers to show me kindness. Of all us brothers, I am the only one with a different mother. Though the eldest, I am sickly, which makes me seem terribly unreliable. Yet here I am, next in line for the throne, and I cannot imagine my younger brothers being happy with the prospect. But I will not give up. For how can I hope to eliminate war among nations if I cannot resolve quarrels among brothers? My first task is to become closer to the second prince. He who treats me most favorably. I feel certain he will listen to my ideas. Forgive me for writing you a lousy goodbye letter on the day you leave. I would have gone to see you off in person if it weren't for this damn job. I wanted to talk to you about the formation of a neutral organization to address international warfare. I'm sorry my country couldn't work with you. What power I do have holds little sway over people at the top of the food chain. I know this doesn't make up for things, but I pulled some strings to secure the medicine enclosed in this letter. It helps with coughs, heart palpitations, and chest pains. And while it's not a cure, it should at least make things a little easier for you. I'm sorry this is all I can do, but I really hope it helps. On a side note, I want you to know how much you motivate me. You're younger than I am, yet you work twice as hard. I'm going to take a page from that book and do what I can to earn more power within my own parliament. I'm really looking forward to the day we can sit down and talk about the future together. Until then. Yeah, that kid in the old church? I think he died. Back around tavern chatter. Me and that kid you went out to check on that one time? Got a real kick out of that, by the way. Look at you, acting like some kind of saint. Yeah, that's the one. I haven't seen that dude who used to bring him food every day either. Considering the kid's state, I'm betting he didn't just get better and move on. Ice clinking against glass. Rumors say he's the prince who was exiled from the kingdom. Hard to know considering how gaunt his face was, but I guess he looks similar. And if it is him, he'll likely be carrying valuables. Probably wouldn't be hard to secure given his condition. Well, let's find out. Glass clinking against glass. End of recording. And with that, on to Demos. My wife is the queen of this land. She has long been a strong, kind woman, and the words she uses to describe our country's future always shine brighter than the stars. And yet, it is perhaps idealistic and naive for a ruler to speak of such things. But the more you listen to her, the more it sounds like an achievable reality. The beautiful country in her mind is precious to me, and I want to see the notion become real. But more than that, I want to be at her side on the day she achieves it, because the hours she spent telling me of her ideal future have been some of the finest in my life. But I know that in order to achieve her dream, we will have to, at times, resort to methods she hates, physical force, violence, or worse. A King's Memoir, Part 1. Our kingdom had always been adept at creating intricate clockwork mechanisms with a skill in the art far surpassing that of any neighboring lands. As such, the other countries on the continent considered us to be a great menace. And perhaps they were correct to do so, for a new type of research was taking place within our kingdom, one that would secure us an endless supply of soldiers. Throwing all of our money, power, and effort into the task, our country soon found favorable results, and the soldiers were brought to life more quickly than even the most optimistic projections. A new creation was the ultimate soldier, a creature made of steel and wire that would never tire, and with a mind capable of calculating at impossibly fast speeds. The lead researcher, who called his creation Clockwork People, explained that having passed basic performance tests, they would now enter the final stage of testing before sending them into the field. "I appreciate you taking the time to come out all this way, Your Majesty," said the lead researcher, as he gestured to a line of clockwork people on the other side of the window. They looked more human than the last time I came to observe the work, and yet, despite their familiar bodies, their eyes were empty. They seemed less like they were standing of their own free will, and more that they could do nothing else. "We have come to the conclusion," continued the researcher, "that in order for clockwork people to operate in an optimal manner, we must integrate into their thought processes 4 laws, and today I would like to demonstrate for you a test of those laws." The researcher's fingers flew over a device in his hand. A moment later, the room went dark, and an image was projected onto the wall. It was a bit difficult to make out, but through the shadows and gloom I could see a mass of people heading into a village. Some were the clockwork people, but a number were our own human soldiers. I even recognized a few of their number. "This is a live feed of a unit presently en route to the stronghold of some bandits," said the researcher. He went on to explain that the test was for the clockwork people to protect the senior officer leading the arrest operation. The bandit stronghold looked like any other house in the city, but when the unit marched in, their footsteps rough and heavy in the moonless dark, they caught the bandits off guard and captured them without incident. It was an impressive display, one so good I failed to hide my glee. "I see Your Majesty is pleased," said the researcher, "and yet we have something far more impressive in store." As the squad led the captive bandits out of the building, a few more of the ruffians launched a surprise attack. Chaos engulfed the scene, and I saw the superior officer at the front of the fray take a stray bullet and fall. The clockwork people immediately surrounded him, prioritizing his safety above all else. Then I noticed something strange. One of the clockwork people did not leap to the officer's defense. Instead, it hurried to the side of a random human soldier and assumed a protective stance. After a bit of a struggle, our unit managed to subdue the bandits, and the video cut out. All I could think about was the clockwork soldier who had protected the random man. And when I mentioned this to the researcher, I saw a smile appear on his face. "You have a keen eye, Your Majesty. In truth, we had the commanding officer switch uniforms with that man." "Interesting," I replied. I'd heard the clockwork people immediately confirmed rank by the insignia on a uniform. That alone would be impressive, but this someone somehow saw past the insignia and recognized the superior officer. "Your Majesty is indeed correct. But how?" The researcher explained that the clockwork person in question had been collecting information of its own accord during the mission. It did not rely solely on the intelligence provided before the mission. Instead, it continued to observe and arrived at the correct conclusion through a constant updating and verification of information. "To sum up," said the researcher, "we have given the clockwork people small variations in their cogitation. In essence, each one has something of a personality. And it appears this personality worked in our favor this time," I added. "Indeed, sire. Yet, while we have achieved fruitful results, we will make certain not to incorporate any dangerous behaviors to said personalities." As I nodded, another thought occurred to me. What were you testing in this particular instance, by the way? "The first law. A clockwork being must always protect the lives of the royal family or its own commanding officer." He turned to me then and bowed his head slightly. "Now then, Your Majesty, do you have any opinions as to what should be done with this particular unit?" "Keep testing," I said, as I turned to leave. "We can always dispose of the thing later if we need to." My wife is pregnant. He'll be our first child, and the future ruler of this country. Her breathing is pained. Her skin, which once shone like a newly polished pearl, is now pale and lifeless. As I stand before her and gaze upon her distended stomach, I cannot contain my anxiety. She has always been sickly, and I worry she may not survive the birth. It is the first time I realize I have such a weakness, yet somehow I manage to swallow my fear and smile at her. "Let's think of a name for our child," she says to me in a faint whisper. "We will entrust our baby with the future of this country, so I want to name it together." Grasp her delicate, fragile hand, and nod. The King's Memoir, Part 2. There came the deafening sound of something large splitting open, followed by a wave of high-pitched, delicate noises. Several clockwork soldiers had obeyed orders and opened fire on a vase of flowers. The kingdom was currently pushing the development of automatons of war. Yet if they were to be the ideal soldiers, we would need to implement in them 4 distinct laws. The destruction of the flower vase was a test of the second law, one many members of the royal court had watched with great interest. The second law: a clockwork being must follow the orders of the royal family or its highest ranking officer. Several soldiers, as well as a common beggar plucked off the street, were shouting commands at the clockwork people. The test was to see if they could pick out the voice of the highest ranking person and execute that command. Clockwork people stood in a line on the other side of thick reinforced glass. All wore special earpieces. We were told that was how they heard the cacophony of orders, and when they determined the highest ranking one to fire on the flower vase, they did so without hesitation. As the test continued, they fired on a number of different items from among a jumbled mass on a desk. "Let's have them shoot the clock next," said the lead researcher. A moment later, the orders came through both the headsets of the clockwork people and speakers in the room where the royal court was stationed. "The pot!" cried the beggar. "The vase!" murmured the soldiers. "The clock!" whispered the commanding officer. The clock exploded in a hail of bullets, causing the audience to cheer with delight. After clearing up the mess, the researchers came out of a back room with a number of live rabbits and proceeded to dump them on the ground, where they began hopping about. "Might you order them to kill the rabbits, sire?" said the lead researcher. The voices began anew, order spilling upon order. But when my voice rang out, it was followed by the predictable thunder of gunshots. But something was strange this time. Unlike the previous demonstrations, the gunshots were not in unison. Indeed, while all the rabbits now laid down on the floor, some had been shot multiple times. What could explain this discrepancy? Yes, the rabbits were moving about, but I had been assured the clockwork people had near-perfect accuracy. The head researcher clearly sensed my question. "One of the unit feels joy when it kills a living being, sire," he said. "Another is hesitant, while a third makes no distinction between animate and inanimate objects. Basically, the results change depending on their personalities." Ah yes, the personalities. When I last visited the lab, the researcher informed me that each unit had been giving small changes to their cogitation, resulting in what they were terming personalities. After cleaning away the gore, the scientists brought out a group of monkeys. The head researcher then proceeded to dole out various conflicting orders. Bite their ears, soothe them, grab their legs. While the clockwork people obeyed, their actions were not anywhere near in unison, and when they were given the final order to kill the monkeys, things diverged even more. Some took their time, enjoying the act of slowly taking a life. Others, however, seemed wrecked with guilt, and their hesitation to end a life ended up causing the poor creatures far more suffering than if they had simply been swift and sure with the killing blow. So though the means had been different, the pain experienced by each monkey was ultimately the same. I personally found it fascinating, but the expressions of my fellow royals soon clouded over. They clearly had not expected to see such a gruesome sight. The lead researcher, however, paid no attention to their discomfort and ordered his subordinates to proceed to the final test, one held with humans. Just as with the monkeys, the lead researcher gave the clockwork people various orders, but this time their personalities shone through brighter than ever. When they acted against their targets with their unique hairstyles, face shapes, and clothes, they moved with a grace and skill that belied their mechanical nature. But in the moments where they were not exerting power, their movements were awkward and comical. I suddenly understood that was how deadly weapons were meant to be, but I also realized that nothing more could be gained by dragging such a thing out further. "Enough," I said. "End this test." The lead researcher turned to the clockwork people. "Kill them," he said. During the order, the crackle of gunfire rang out through the room. One unit, however, did not act. Instead, it simply stood in place, almost as if it had been powered off. This was a unit which had obeyed every previous order with a kind of dull, plodding precision, one which I thought might lack a personality altogether. As I shook my head in disappointment at having witnessed our first failure, I heard the sounds of a sob and looked over to see a small boy crying. "Ah, most excellent," said the lead researcher. I turned to him, confused, and he continued. "I believe the unit was following a voice not from its earpiece, but from this very room. The crying boy was the heir to one of the country's most prestigious noble families, and upon hearing his distress, the clockwork soldier had stayed his hand. Now that was most impressive." At the end of a difficult birth, we finally have a healthy baby boy, and yet my wife's condition continues to worsen, almost as if the child is stealing her life away. But she is too clever to leave things in flux, so before becoming a bedridden, she bequeathed the throne to me, leaving the future of our country in my hands. Now that I hold the power of a king, I see everything differently, and I realize doing things my wife's way will make it difficult to bring wealth to our land. This thought, and others like it, plague me more and more with each passing day. In our happiest moments, my wife spoke of a bright and shining future. But can I really achieve such ideals alone? Doing things my way? Down one path, we link arms and work in harmony with other countries. Down another, we expand our borders with force. So though we wish for what appears to be the same future, why must the journey be so different? King's Memoir, Part 3. The kingdom's best scientists and most advanced technologies came together during the development of the clockwork people, and as the tests continued, tests to see if they would endure real-world usage, things reached a new and exciting phase. The lead researcher had concluded that 4 laws needed to be incorporated into the clockwork people's thought processes if they were to operate optimally. The first law: a clockwork being must always protect the lives of the royal family or its own commanding officer. The second law: a clockwork being must follow the orders of the royal family or its highest ranking officer. Third law: the clockwork being must protect itself so long as doing so does not contradict the first 2 laws. Now, the team was finally ready to test both the durability of the clockwork bodies as well as the third law. 30 clockwork people stood in neat rows in the testing area. Each one had a slight variance in their thought process, a trait that would manifest as a kind of personality. While this was done in order to produce more accurate reports, it meant each clockwork person would act differently in response to the same order. "Let us begin," said the lead researcher. A large door at the far end of the room rolled back to reveal one of our largest weapons, a thing the size of an elephant that stomped into the room on multiple legs. This unit has proven to be one of our greatest battlefield successes, said the lead researcher proudly. I knew all about it, of course. It was a crude device that couldn't execute fine maneuvers, but was perfect for situations requiring overwhelming destructive power. It was also the first weapon I'd ordered to be built after ascending the throne. In this test, we hope to see the Clockwork People defeat their foe while protecting themselves in the process. Any units that accomplish this task will be considered our first field-ready Clockwork People. As a buzzer sounded, signaling the beginning of the test, the Clockwork People sprang to life before the massive weapon could even respond. They pelted it with gunfire from every direction, but that did little more than scratch its heavy armor plating. After a few seconds of this, they changed course and began focusing their attacks on its joints in an effort to bring it down. But then the weapon unleashed a brilliant beam of white-hot light from its cannons, an attack that sent the Clockwork People flying. It's like watching ants fight a scorpion, I mused. Precisely, the lead researcher enthused. But wait. The different personalities of the Clockwork People quickly began to emerge. A handful attempted to escape, but were gunned down before they could reach the doors. Some clung desperately to the massive weapon, while others ran in chaotic circles and fired their guns wildly. The weapon kicked and smashed and stamped them in a frenzy, and it seemed only a matter of time before all the Clockwork People would be destroyed. There was a clear imbalance of power, and I felt certain the test had entered its final, messiest stage. Irritated, I turned to look at the head researcher, and was shocked to see him smiling. Please watch, Your Majesty. At his prompting, I saw one clockwork person firing at the weapon from behind cover. As I watched, I realized it was not firing indiscriminately, but instead targeting one specific part of its armor. After creating a rather sizable dent, the unit leapt out from its hiding spot, ducking and weaving through cannon attacks as it approached the weapon. Once there, it reached into the dent and ripped the plating free. Clinging to the weapon itself means there's no possibility of being struck by any of its attacks. The weapon's pilot, realizing their predicament, causes the weapon to move in such a way that the clockwork person would be shaken free, but it quickly leapt back on and peeled away more of the plating. There's potential here, murmured the researcher. The newly armored clockwork person, the last one standing, ripped off another chunk to reveal the weapon's internal circuitry. If it could break through in that precise spot and tear apart the wiring, there was a chance of victory. But the unit was in a sad state. Despite its armor, it had been thrown to the ground countless times, losing an arm and suffering various other injuries. Before it could reach into the wires, it was thrown free into a pile of its disabled fellows. And as it struggled to pull itself to its feet, the massive weapon stomped over, raised a single leg, and ended the test for good. A disappointing ending, I said, shaking my head. Having completed its mission, the weapon sat quietly in place, as though awaiting its next orders. The valiant unit that had fought to the end was now buried amongst the husk of its fellow clockwork people, and I could no longer pick it out from among the rest. However, I added, that one unit showed promise. The lead researcher nodded in excited agreement. My wife, our queen, has died. Her past, including everything she said and did, now feels as fiction. My light is gone. My world empty. Hollow. I was right. Love and kindness are not enough to save us. Only by military force can this country and its people hope to be governed. Though I was the one who ordered the development of Clockwork People to begin in earnest, the first prince still looks upon our new soldiers with fear. Though he's grown into a kind young man, one fitting of the name his mother gave him, I feel he may be too weak to take up a position of power. If only the prince had been named not by my late wife, but by me. If we had only named him after our god of war as I desired, then perhaps things would have been different. King's Memoir, Part 4. Metal bodies that do not know exhaustion. Mechanical brains which calculate at impossible speed. This is the new face of the soldier. As our research progressed, tests were carried out in the name of the kingdom's prosperity. We had been calling our new creations Clockwork People under the assumption they would take on tasks in place of humans. But one day, the lead researcher said something that changed everything. Your Majesty, I would like you to meet our very first Clockwork Soldier, the first one to successfully pass all the tests. Before me knelt a Clockwork person. No, a Clockwork Soldier. Its head was bowed in the manner of a loyal retainer, and I was immediately intrigued. While I had seen many such machines at work in the tests, only a select few had managed to catch my eye. This unit does not seem familiar to me, I mused. Which tests did it pass? Indeed, Your Majesty, replied the lead researcher eagerly. This is not a unit you have seen in action, yet at the same time, one could also say you have. As I frowned, the lead researcher pointed out the window towards the massive testing area, where clockwork corpses were scattered across the floor like discarded toys. This unit is the cumulative result of all of our tests, physically as well as mentally. The perfect soldier would have a quick mind, a tenacious body, and an unshakable spirit. And while humans could come close to those ideals, they could never quite achieve them to the utmost. But now the lead researcher was claiming this new creation had done so. I gazed down at the kneeling clockwork soldier, who remained perfectly still. From all those clockwork people, all those sacrifices, this unit had been born. It was not simply a matter of switching out parts, though, the researcher continued. We extracted experiences and thought processes from the remaining records in order to optimize this unit's operational circuits. Images of all the units that had acted in bizarre fashions, the ones that left an impression in past tests, flashed through my mind. Such a combination would certainly make a clockwork soldier that fights like a human, but I thought I made it clear that was not our ultimate goal. What I wanted were beings that did not think, but instead followed orders, doing whatever was necessary to see a task to completion. As you say, Majesty, our tests proved the greatest results are obtained from units with the weakest personalities. The lead researcher had once thought instilling human-like emotional variation would lead to the creation of soldiers that could adapt to any environment. It was not an altogether incorrect thought. Several of the clockwork people I saw throughout the test managed to put such personalities to good use. But the clockwork soldiers were weapons, and standardized practical tools did not require variation. But this is not to say their personalities were a total waste, continued the researcher. Their thoughts and experiences played a role in heightening the abilities of the unit before you. Of course, we will ensure it does not manifest as a personality, but as a kind of auxiliary mechanism that helps the unit execute its mission. The researcher wound his way carefully through his words, making them sound less like an explanation and more like an excuse, but I merely nodded, choosing not to question him further. Because even if a personality were to manifest, all we had to do was delete it. And the fourth law, expunged, Your Majesty. The researchers originally wanted a fourth law. A clockwork being must serve the royal family and its superior officers of its own will. But weapons did not need a will any more than they needed personalities. All they needed to do was take lives without thinking. And now that this unit had been born, we could unleash our weapons on the world. Raise your head. The clockwork soldier looked up at me as I spoke. Though it was designed to look human, its expression was completely blank, which caused me to smile. This was the face of a killing machine, a heartless creation that would carry out any order without a single thought. I crouched before the unit, took its chin between my fingers, and peered into its glassy eyes. As our country's first clockwork soldier, I think you are deserving of a name. I smiled as I fell silent. Though I appeared to be deep in thought, I already had a name in mind. You will fight like a god of war and bring victory to this country. Therefore, your name will be. This man is a clockwork soldier built by a kingdom consumed in a never-ending war. He has been programmed to know and feel all manner of things, fighting styles, battle strategies, and of course, loyalty to the kingdom's rulers. And if I had to guess, I'd say his memories of the time he spent traveling with the prince were also filled with violence. Let's take a little peek, shall we? Oh dear, he's pointing his gun at a woman who spoke to the prince in town. Oh, but she was just asking for directions. Hurry away, you poor thing. Oh no, he just shot at something in the trees. Was it an enemy or an assassin or... Oh no, apparently he was just getting some fruit out of the tree for the prince's dinner. And now in the dark of night, he keeps watch over his charge. Each time the boy turns over, he pulls the blanket back across his thin shoulders. He does this over and over and over again. I imagine if we asked him why he did those things, he would claim that they were merely a byproduct of his programming. But Mama thinks there's more to this story. In fact, Mama thinks the Clockwork Man has created his very own will. A lone man waits on a dry and windswept land. Across from him stand several metal dummies, his targets. This is a firing range for a weapon currently in development. A weapon known only as the Clockwork Soldier. Though the man holds a gun for the first time in his life, it somehow feels as familiar as an old friend. He pauses a moment to calculate the bullet's trajectory, the wind speed, and the recoil, then pulls the trigger. It is over in the blink of an eye. As he places the gun in its holster, curls of smoke rise from the single hole in each of the target's chests, the exact place where their hearts would be. The man admires his work for a moment, then turns and leaves the range. In that brief span of time, he has learned all there is to know of the gun. Wait for me. Do not move until I come back. The man does as he is told, standing motionless before a church scarred by endless war. No muscle so much as twitches as he waits for his commanding general to return. Eventually, a priestess covered in ash approaches the waiting man and throws herself at him with a cry. Please, sir, I don't want to die! Protect me from the army! He clings to him, causing the man to sway ever so slightly. When the general returns a few moments later, he finds the priestess lying on the ground. Why did you kill her? He asks. You told me not to move. I had to follow your orders. The general grins, clearly delighted by the man's answer. You truly are the perfect little puppet, he says. The boy's cough echoes through the room, his pale breath vanishing into the air of the underground storage area. The Clockwork Man notes the temperature and realizes that it has fallen another degree. This climate will harm you, my prince. Allow me to disable my temperature regulator so I might heat the room. At this suggestion, the boy suppresses a cough while holding out one pallid hand. Just promise you won't destroy yourself trying to help me again. The man, reflected in the boy's clear gray eyes, replies with a hardened voice and blank expression. Clockwork soldiers do not understand the concept of promises, my prince. Only orders. The words appear to wound the boy, but the man does not know why, nor does he ask. I'll remember, says the boy. And that's enough. He coughs again, and weakly lets his hand sink back down to his side. I'm going in to ask around. Wait here, okay? After arriving at the village, the boy gives this order before stepping inside a small church. The man follows the child's instruction to the letter, waiting patiently near the door. But after a bit, he hears the sound of screams. A moment later, a child runs up and begins desperately tugging on his arm. Please, sir, our friend just fell out of a tree. You have to carry him to the doctor. The child then yanks the man's hand again, pulling him down the road and away from his charge. A short time later, the boy emerges from the church to find the man kneeling in the dust of the road. Fail to follow your orders and await punishment, he says. Here's what happened. The boy listens intently to his story. When he learns the child is safe, he sighs with genuine relief and allows himself the briefest of smiles. Don't be ridiculous. I'm not going to punish you for that. Let us rest. The attending man makes the suggestion upon hearing the boy, his master, breathing in harsh, ragged gasps. No, replies the boy, we need to hurry on. As they proceed, a pack of overgrown stray dogs suddenly appears to block their way. Though annoying, they are enemies easily felled. As the fight proceeds, a thought occurs to the man. If I were to let myself be injured here, my master would surely accept my proposal to rest. On the heels of this thought comes memory. A thing the man recalls someone saying to him. He immediately discards the option of intentional injury and begins dispatching the dogs with calm efficiency. Once the enemy is defeated, the man turns to the boy. My apologies, but due to exhaustion as a result of that battle, I request rest. At last, the boy nods in agreement. After they make camp and the boy drifts off into a fitful sleep, the man minds the fire and thinks about the events of the day. The thought that came to him during the battle was a memory of himself and his master. White breath, shaking hands, gray eyes, and these words. Promise me you'll never harm yourself for my sake again. Why did he use his own injuries as an excuse to force his master to rest? Why did his promise come to mind in that moment? Why did it cause him to alter his actions? Why did he lie about exhaustion when he was not tired? The flames of the campfire shimmer in his eyes. No matter how many calculations he runs, he can find no answer. Instead, he simply sits back and thinks about the warm emotion rolling about in his chest. And that is where we are going to leave it for today. That was actually a lot more interesting than I expected it to be. I didn't really like Rion or Demos as a duo, but seeing their development is definitely a lot more interesting, particularly Demos's. And knowing that they are two sides of the same pantheon, I guess. But that is where we are going to cut it for today. So thank you all so much for following my playthrough of Nier Reincarnation, and I'll see you in the next episode. Bye now.